What is the most satisfying way you've ever watched a greedy person's life crumble in real time? The first face I saw when I finally walked through my parents' front door wasn't crying tears of joy. My dad was standing in the kitchen, dropping his coffee mug on the hardwood, his face turning an ashen gray. He looked absolutely devastated that I was breathing. I had been trapped in a remote Himalayan village for 5 months after the devastating April 14th earthquake wiped out all communication lines. The embassy finally airlifted me out. I stood there in borrowed clothes, waiting for a hug. Instead, my dad gripped the kitchen island and whispered, "We already filed the paperwork." I asked him what he meant. He wouldn't make eye contact. He just muttered that my older brother, Jason, had handled my affairs. I borrowed my dad's iPad and searched my name. The results made my stomach drop into a bottomless pit. I was the sole founder of a cybersecurity startup called Apex Shield. I had spent 6 years building the architecture. Right at the top of the search results was a press release dated 3 weeks ago. Apex Shield acquired by Vanguard Tech for $4.2 million. Jason's smiling face was on the article, listed as the acting CEO. I called my brother immediately. When he heard my voice, he didn't ask if I was hurt or how I survived. He just breathed heavily into the receiver. "What did you do with my company?" I demanded. Jason let out an exasperated groan like I had just inconvenienced his morning commute. "I liquidated it," he said. "Do you know how expensive it was to keep your servers running while we thought you were crushed under a mountain? You should be thanking me for salvaging your life's work. It was a nightmare negotiating with Vanguard." "You sold my intellectual property," I yelled. He scoffed. "You were officially presumed dead, Sarah. I wasn't going to let your assets rot in probate. I bought a house in Scottsdale with my cut. I needed a fresh start after the trauma of losing you." I hung up, trembling with rage. I checked my personal accounts. Jason had drained my $80,000 in emergency savings using the power of attorney my parents blindly granted him. None of it was saved for me. My dad walked into the living room, rubbing his neck. "Just let him have this, Sarah. Jason has always struggled to find his footing. You're young. You can build another software program. Don't tear our family apart over money." I didn't say another word. I walked out the front door and took a bus to downtown Seattle. I went straight to the patent attorney who originally helped me file my trademarks. He was shocked to see me alive, but his shock quickly turned into a predatory grin when I explained the situation. Vanguard Tech had paid $4.2 million for the Apex Shield source code. But what Jason didn't know, what nobody knew except me, was that the core algorithm had a secondary failsafe. Without my biometric authorization and the physical master key drive hidden in a safety deposit box at Chase Bank, the entire security framework would automatically encrypt and lock itself down exactly 90 days after its last admin update. Jason sold them a ticking time bomb. 71 days later, I was sitting in my new rented apartment when someone started pounding violently on my door. I looked through the peephole. It was Jason. He looked like he hadn't slept in a week. His designer shirt was wrinkled, and he was sweating profusely. I opened the door, with the chain still attached. "The code locked me out," he screamed, clawing at the doorframe. "Vanguard's entire network is crashing. They are suing me for $15 million in damages for selling them a fraudulent, locked system. They froze my assets, Sarah. They took the Scottsdale house. You have to give me the decryption key." "You sold a dead woman's property," I said calmly. "How was I supposed to know you'd miraculously survive and ruin my life?" He sobbed, his voice cracking. "I am going to federal prison for corporate fraud if you don't fix this." My dad called my cell phone right then, leaving a frantic voicemail begging me to save my brother from ruin. I looked Jason dead in the eyes. "You didn't grieve. You went straight to the bank." I closed the door, slid the deadbolt into place, and walked back to my computer. I sat there for a long time, just listening to him pace in the hallway. He wasn't even begging anymore. He was talking to himself, a low, frantic mumble that occasionally broke into a sharp, desperate sob. I heard his footsteps fade away eventually, the heavy thud of his boots echoing against the linoleum until the stairwell door clicked shut. My apartment felt incredibly cold. I looked at my phone. 14 missed calls from my dad, 3 from my mom. A text from Jason that just said, "I'll give you $1 million. Just open the drive, $1 million." He was still trying to negotiate with money that didn't belong to him. I didn't sleep that night. I spent the hours looking through the contract details my attorney, Marcus, had pulled for me. Vanguard Tech wasn't just a mid-sized firm. They were a massive infrastructure conglomerate. They didn't buy Apex Shield to grow it. They bought it to integrate it into their municipal data centers. That meant when the encryption triggered, it didn't just lock a few files. It shut down the traffic management systems for 3 major cities on the West Coast and froze the billing cycles for 500,000 utility customers. Jason hadn't just sold them a product. He had sold them a load-bearing wall for their entire digital skyscraper, and that wall had just turned into smoke. The next morning, I went to see Marcus. His office was in one of those old brick buildings in Pioneer Square that smells like expensive cedar and wet pavement. He had a stack of papers on his desk that looked 3 inches thick. "They're coming for him, Sarah," Marcus said, leaning back in his leather chair. He looked almost impressed. "Vanguard filed an emergency injunction this morning. They aren't just suing for the purchase price. They're suing for lost revenue, breach of contract, and intentional misrepresentation. They think Jason sabotaged the handoff to extort more money." "And the parents?" I asked. My voice sounded flat, even to me. Marcus sighed. "Your father signed as a secondary witness on the transfer of the IP. Since Jason was acting under the assumption of your death, and your father validated the timeline, they're looking at your dad for negligence at the very least. If Jason tries to claim he did it with the family's full knowledge to secure their future, your dad is on the hook for the civil liabilities too." I felt a sharp pang in my chest, but it wasn't guilt. It was more like a dull, heavy disappointment. My dad had watched me pack my bags for Nepal. He had hugged me at the airport, and within weeks of the news breaking, he was signing papers to help Jason liquidate my life. "What about the key?" I asked. "Technically, the key is yours," Marcus said. "You are the sole owner of the patent. The sale was fraudulent because the seller didn't have the legal right to transfer the title. Jason committed identity theft and fraud on a massive scale. Vanguard wants the key, but they also want someone's head on a spike. They've already contacted the FBI's cybercrime division." I left Marcus's office and walked toward the waterfront. The wind off the sound was biting. My phone buzzed again. It was a group text from my mom. "Sarah, please. Jason is at the house. He's having a breakdown. We can fix this as a family. Just come home." I didn't go home. I went to the safety deposit box at Chase. The bank felt like a tomb. I sat in a small private viewing room with the heavy metal box on the table in front of me. Inside was a single, ruggedized USB drive and a handwritten notebook where I'd mapped out the original logic gates for the algorithm. I ran my thumb over the drive. This was the only thing Jason hadn't found when he ransacked my apartment while I was presumed dead. He'd taken my spare laptops, my monitors, even my favorite leather jacket, but he'd forgotten about the one thing that actually made the company work. When I stepped back out onto the street, my brother was waiting by my car. He must have followed me from the apartment. He looked worse than he had the night before. His eyes were bloodshot, and he had a dark bruise on his cheek. I didn't know if he'd hit something or if someone had hit him. "You have it," he said, staring at the small bulge in my pocket. "I know you have it. Give it to me, Sarah. I'll sign everything back over to you. Every cent I have left." "You don't have anything left, Jason," I said. "You told me yourself. They froze your accounts." "I have the Scottsdale house in a trust," he yelled, his voice cracking. "I can get it out, please. They're at the house. There are guys in suits at Mom and Dad's house right now asking questions about the signatures." I looked at him, really looked at him, and for the first time, I didn't see my big brother. I saw a man who had looked at my death and seen a windfall. He hadn't seen a tragedy. He'd seen a $4 million lottery ticket. "Who told you I was dead?" I asked. Jason blinked, confused. "The news. The reports." "No," I said. "The embassy list said unaccounted for. It never said deceased. You had the death certificate expedited. You paid a lawyer in Kathmandu to send a falsified local report to the State Department. I saw the filing dates in Marcus's office, Jason. You started the process 12 days after the quake. I wasn't even cold yet." Jason's face went white. He opened his mouth to lie, but nothing came out. He just stood there, the rain starting to dampen his expensive hair. "I'm not giving you the key," I said. "They'll destroy you too," he hissed, his desperation turning back into a pathetic kind of venom. "You're the owner. You're responsible for the system failure." "I was incapacitated in a foreign country," I said, stepping around him. "I have the medical records. I have the flight manifests. I'm the victim here. You're just the guy who stole a car and realized it didn't have a steering wheel." I got into my car and locked the doors. He pounded on the glass, his face distorted, screaming things I couldn't hear over the engine. I backed out of the space and drove away, leaving him standing in the middle of the parking lot. I didn't go back to my apartment. I knew he'd be there. Instead, I checked into a cheap motel near the airport. I needed to think. I had the power to stop the crash. I could call Vanguard, hand over the key, and probably walk away with a massive settlement for the theft of my IP. But doing that would mean Jason's fraud would be mitigated. It would mean he might just get a slap on the wrist, a suspended sentence, or a fine he'd spend the rest of his life avoiding. If I did nothing, the system stayed locked. Vanguard would lose millions every hour, and they would make sure Jason felt every single penny of that loss. My phone rang. It was my dad. I finally answered. "Sarah?" he gasped. "Thank God. Listen, you have to help us. Your mother is hysterical. There are investigators here. They're asking about the power of attorney. They're saying I might have committed perjury. I just did what Jason said. He told me it was the only way to pay for the search parties." "What search parties, Dad?" I asked. I checked the records. There was never a private search team. There wasn't even a phone call to the Red Cross from your house. There was a long, heavy silence on the other end. We trusted him," my dad whispered. "No," I said. "You wanted the money. You thought if Jason handled it, you could keep your hands clean while you spent my savings. How's the new kitchen remodel going, Dad?" I saw the pictures on Mom's Facebook from 2 months ago. I hung up before he could answer. 2 days later, the news broke. Infrastructure crisis. Vanguard Tech admits massive system failure due to internal security lockout. The stock price plummeted. And right there, in the third paragraph of the Seattle Times article, was Jason's name. They called him a rogue executive who had sold faulty software. The FBI showed up at my motel room that afternoon. I wasn't surprised. They'd tracked my credit card. There were 2 of them, a woman in a gray suit and a man who looked like he hadn't smiled since the 90s. They were polite but firm. "Miss Sterling," the woman said, "we've been talking to your brother and your father." I imagine they had a lot to say, I said, sitting on the edge of the bed. "Your brother claims you're holding the city's data hostage," the man said. He pulled out a tablet. "He says you have a physical device that can unlock the Vanguard network. He's offering it as part of a plea deal." "He's offering something he doesn't own," I replied. "And he's lying about the hostage part. The system is functioning exactly as it was designed. It's an automated security protocol to prevent unauthorized access in the event of a total administrative blackout. It's a feature, not a bug." The woman leaned forward. "Miss Sterling, 3 hospitals are currently operating on paper records because their billing and patient intake systems are tied to that grid. We aren't here to talk about your family drama. We're here because there is a public safety issue." "I understand," I said, "and I'm happy to cooperate, but I won't cooperate with Vanguard. I'll cooperate with you. I want it on record that I am providing the solution to the federal government to rectify a situation caused by the fraudulent sale of my property." "We can do that," she said. "One more thing," I said. "I want to see the statements Jason made. I want to see exactly how he tried to frame this." They hesitated. Then the man handed me a folder. I read through the transcripts. Jason hadn't just blamed me for the lockout. He had told them I'd planned the whole thing from Nepal. He claimed I'd faked my disappearance to create a dead man switch scenario so I could extort Vanguard for more money later. He said I was the mastermind. He even tried to say our dad was an innocent bystander he'd accidentally misled. He was throwing me under the bus to save his house in Scottsdale. I looked up at the agents. "The key is in a locker at the Greyhound station. I'll give you the code, but I want the fraud charges against my brother to be pursued to the fullest extent of the law. No deals for cooperation. If I provide the key, his leverage is gone, right?" The agents looked at each other. "Technically, yes," the woman said. "If we have the key from you, his offer of help is worthless." "Good," I said. "Then let's go." As I walked out of the motel, I felt a strange sense of lightness. I was giving up the company. I was giving up the $4.2 million, but I was also giving up the weight of a family that had priced my life at the cost of a kitchen remodel and a desert mansion. I didn't hear from Jason for a week. Then, the email started. Not from him, he was in custody, but from his public defender. Then, from my mom. Then from a series of aunts and uncles I hadn't spoken to in years. "How could you do this to your own blood? He's facing 20 years, Sarah. 20 years! Dad is losing the house to pay for the legal fees. Are you happy now?" I wasn't happy, but I wasn't sad either. I was just done. I went back to the house one last time to get the rest of my things, the stuff Jason hadn't managed to sell. The locks had been changed. I stood on the porch, looking at the familiar wooden door, and realized I didn't even want to go inside. The home, I remembered, didn't exist anymore. My mom opened the door. She looked 10 years older. "She didn't invite me in. The bank is foreclosing," she said. Her voice was brittle. "Jason's assets were all seized. teased. Every penny he gave us. They're clawing it back. They say it's proceeds of a crime. We're going to be on the street, Sarah. All because you wouldn't just talk to him. I did talk to him, Mom, I said. I talked to him for years about his gambling, about his investments, about how he kept leaning on me, and then I went missing. And he didn't even wait for a body to be found before he started spending my life. He's your brother, she screamed. He was my brother, I corrected. Now he's just a guy who got caught. I turned to walk away, but my dad was standing in the driveway, holding a box of Jason's old trophies. He looked at me, and for a second, I saw a flash of that ashen gray face from the day I returned. We just wanted things to be easy for once, he said. It wasn't an apology. It was a confession of laziness. Being greedy is never easy, Dad, I said. It's actually a lot of work. I got into my car and drove toward the highway. I had a little bit of money left in a secondary account Jason hadn't found, about $12,000. It wasn't much, but it was enough to get to California, enough to start over. As I reached the city limits, my phone buzzed with a news alert. Vanguard Tech files lawsuit against Sterling family for collusion. They weren't just going after Jason anymore. They were going after the whole estate. The easy life my dad wanted was about to become a decade of depositions, court dates, and bankruptcy filings. I pulled over at a rest stop and took out my SIM card. I looked at the small piece of plastic for a second, thinking about all the frantic messages, the guilt trips, and the lies that were currently flooding into it. Then, I dropped it onto the asphalt and crushed it under my heel. I got back on the road. The sun was setting over the Olympics, casting long, purple shadows across the water. I didn't have a company, I didn't have a family, and I didn't have a home. But I had the silence. And for the first time in 5 months, the silence didn't feel like being trapped under a mountain. It felt like being free. I drove for 6 hours before I stopped again. I was in a small town in Oregon, the kind of place where the main street is just a gas station and a diner with a flickering neon sign. I sat in a booth, drinking burnt coffee and watching the local news on a small TV mounted above the bar. They were showing a clip of Jason being led into the courthouse. He had a jacket draped over his head, trying to hide from the cameras, but I'd know that walk anywhere. It was the same arrogant strut he'd had since he was a kid, only now it was hunched, defeated. The reporter mentioned that the mysterious founder of Apex Shield had cooperated with authorities and was not being charged. A woman sitting at the end of the bar sighed. Rich people problems, she muttered to the bartender. Must be nice to have $4 million to fight over. Yeah, I said quietly, staring into my mug. Must be real nice. I paid my bill in cash and walked out into the cool night air. My car was packed with the few things I had left. My old college sweatshirt, a box of photos Jason had missed, and my laptop. I opened the trunk to rearrange some bags, and my hand brushed against a small, velvet box tucked into the side pocket of my backpack. I'd forgotten it was there. I opened it. Inside was a gold watch, my grandfather's. It was the only thing I'd specifically asked Jason to keep safe for me before I left for Nepal. I turned it over. On the back, there was a fresh engraving I hadn't seen before. Property of J. Sterling, 2026. He hadn't even waited for the death certificate to put his name on my inheritance. He'd probably been wearing it while he negotiated the sale of my company. I looked at the watch for a long time. It was beautiful, heavy, and worth a few $1,000s on its own. It was a piece of my history. I walked over to the edge of the parking lot where a storm drain disappeared into the dark earth. I didn't hesitate. I dropped the watch through the grate. I heard it hit the water below with a dull splash. I wasn't going to keep anything that had his name on it, not even a memory. I got back in the driver's seat and looked at the map. There was a town 300 miles south called Eureka. I liked the name. It felt like finding something. My phone, the new one I'd bought at a Target, was empty of contacts. No missed calls, no texts, just a blank slate. As I pulled back onto the 101, I thought about my dad's new kitchen. I thought about the granite countertops he'd bragged about in those Facebook photos. I wondered if the bank would let him take the faucets when they kicked him out, or if those belonged to Vanguard now too. I made it to Eureka by Tuesday afternoon. The town smelled like wet cedar, diesel exhaust, and old salt from the bay. It was exactly the kind of place you go when you don't want to be perceived. The fog rolled in thick off the Pacific, blanketing the streets in a damp gray haze that made it feel like twilight even at 2 in the afternoon. I found a motel called the Seaview, though the only thing you could see from the parking lot was a Denny's and a rundown transmission shop. I paid for 2 weeks in advance. The guy at the front desk didn't blink at the cash. He just slid a physical brass key across the scratched laminate counter and went back to watching a game show on a portable TV. My room was on the second floor, right at the end of the walkway. It smelled faintly of bleach and stale cigarette smoke, but it was mine. I dropped my bags on the floral bedspread, locked the deadbolt, and fastened the chain. I took the remaining 11,000 and change, separated it into 3 envelopes, and hid them inside the lining of my suitcase, behind the bathroom mirror, and under the mattress. For 3 days, I did nothing. I slept 12 hours a night. I walked to a nearby diner for eggs and black coffee. I bought a cheap prepaid smartphone at a pharmacy, paying cash, and only gave the number to the front desk in case of an emergency. I felt a strange, hollow kind of peace. The adrenaline that had kept me alive in the Himalayas and fueled my rage in Seattle was finally draining out of my system, leaving me exhausted but clear-headed. On Friday, I decided it was time to find a real place to live. A 2-week motel stint was a breather, not a plan. I picked up a local paper and circled a few apartment listings. Nothing fancy. Just a 1-bedroom above a hardware store and a small duplex on the edge of town. I walked into a local property management office just off the main drag. A woman with thick acrylic nails and a name tag that read Times, Carol Times, was sitting behind a desk cluttered with file folders. I told her I was looking for a 6-month lease. I had the deposit and first month's rent in cash ready to go. Carol smiled, handed me a clipboard with a rental application, and asked for my driver's license and a $40 application fee. I'll run your background and credit right now, she said, popping her gum. Shouldn't take more than 10 minutes. You want some coffee? It's from a Keurig, but it's hot. I'm fine, thanks, I said, handing over my ID and 2 $20 bills. I sat in a stiff faux leather chair in the waiting area, scrolling mindlessly through the weather app on my burner phone. I felt good. I had no debt. I had always been obsessive about my credit score when I was building Apex Shield. I used to joke with Marcus that my credit was the only thing in my life with a perfect structure. From across the room, the printer whirred to life. Carol pulled a few sheets of paper from the tray. I watched her eyes scan the top page. Her jaw stopped chewing. She frowned, flipped to the second page, and ran a long pink fingernail down a column of text. She let out a low whistle and looked up at me. The friendly customer service smile was gone. Honey, me, Carol said, leaning forward and lowering her voice. I don't know what kind of mess you left behind up north, but I can't touch this. My stomach did a slow, sickening flip. Excuse me? Carol slid the papers across the desk. Your score is a 412. You have 3 accounts in active collections, an auto repossession order, and 2 civil judgments pending against you in King County. I stood up and walked to the desk. I looked down at the paper. It was a summary report from Equifax. Right at the top, under my name and my old Seattle address, was a bold red number, 412. That's not possible, I said. My voice sounded thin, breathless. I don't have any debt. My company was just... I stopped myself. I couldn't explain the Vanguard sale to a property manager in Eureka. There's a mistake. A stolen identity issue. I was out of the country. Carol looked at me with a mixture of pity and suspicion. Look, maybe it is a mistake, but until it's cleared up, nobody in this town is going to rent to you. Not with open judgments. I'm sorry. She slid my driver's license back across the desk. She kept the $40. I walked out of the office and into the damp chill of the street. I couldn't breathe right. The edges of my vision were fuzzy. I walked 3 blocks to a public library, found an open computer terminal in the back corner, and sat down. My hands were shaking so badly I mistyped my own social security number twice on the annual credit report website. When the full, detailed report finally loaded on the screen, I felt like I was looking at an autopsy of my own life. Jason hadn't just drained my emergency savings. He hadn't just sold my company. He had taken out loans. Massive, unsecured personal loans. I scrolled through the trade lines. A $40,000 signature loan from a bank in Delaware. A $35,000 line of credit from a high-interest online lender. A $25,000 bridge loan tied to the title of my car. All of them originated in June and July. I stared at the dates. The earthquake in Nepal hit on April 14th. By June, the embassy had officially categorized me as unaccounted for, presumed casualties. Jason didn't wait for the Vanguard deal to close to start cashing in. He needed money immediately to fund his lifestyle, to buy the designer clothes, to put the down payment on the Scottsdale house before the ink was even dry on the Apex Shield acquisition. He had used the power of attorney to borrow against my clean financial history, bleeding my name dry while I was starving in a mountain village eating boiled lentils. But a power of attorney for lines of credit that large usually requires a secondary guarantor, especially if the primary account holder isn't physically present. I clicked on the dispute tab for the largest loan, requesting to view the digitized origination documents. The PDF took a full minute to load on the library's slow connection. I scrolled down to the signature page. There was Jason's signature, signing on my behalf as POA. Right beneath it, on the line marked Times guarantor, was my father's signature. And beneath that, on the line marked Times witness, was my mother's. I sat in the quiet hum of the library, staring at the screen until the pixels blurred together. They knew. They didn't just blindly sign paperwork for a corporate sale because Jason told them it was the only way to save my legacy. They actively co-signed fraudulent high-interest loans in my name to give him cash up front. They mortgaged a ghost. I closed the browser, wiped my browsing history, and walked out to my car. I got in, locked the doors, and pulled out my burner phone. I dialed Marcus's direct line. He picked up on the second ring. Law offices of Marcus Vance. It's Sarah, I said. There was a sharp exhale on the other end of the line. Jesus Christ, Sarah, where the hell are you? I've been calling your old cell for 3 days. Vanguard's lawyers have been calling my office every 4 hours. I threw the SIM card away, I said, my voice dead flat. Marcus, Jason took out loans, over $100,000 in loans before the sale. My parents co-signed them. I know, Marcus said. He didn't sound surprised. He just sounded tired. I found out yesterday during discovery. It gets worse. How could it possibly get worse? Vanguard isn't just suing for the corporate fraud anymore, Marcus said. Their civil litigators are expanding the scope. They lost a massive amount of face with the infrastructure lockdown, and their shareholders are demanding blood. They are suing the entire Sterling estate under the RICO Act, claiming it was a coordinated family conspiracy to defraud a major corporation. That's insane, I said. I gave the FBI the key. I fixed their network. I was the victim of identity theft. The FBI dropped the criminal charges against you. Yes, Marcus explained, his tone shifting into full lawyer mode. But civil court is a different animal. Vanguard is arguing that because you fled the state and refused to participate in the asset recovery of the $4.2 million, you are a hostile party. And Sarah, your dad threw you under the bus. I gripped the steering wheel so hard my knuckles popped. What do you mean? Your father gave a sworn deposition on Wednesday to try and get himself removed from the civil suit, Marcus said quietly. He claimed that you orchestrated the whole thing before you left for Nepal. He said the company was failing, and you instructed Jason to secure those loans to keep the servers on, and then instructed him to sell the IP if you didn't return. He produced an email, Sarah, an email from your personal Gmail account, dated April 10th, giving Jason full authorization to liquidate Apex Shield and secure lines of credit. The breath left my lungs. I didn't write that. I never wrote that. Jason had my passwords. He had my laptop. He forged it. I believe you, Marcus said. But your father swore under oath that he watched you hit send. He perjured himself to save his own skin, Sarah. And because of that email, the civil judge granted Vanguard a preliminary injunction. They've placed a nationwide freeze on your social security number and flagged your remaining assets. If you try to access a bank, if you try to get a job on the grid, it will trigger an alert. I looked out the windshield at the gray, depressing street. The $12,000 hidden in my motel room was suddenly the only money I would ever have. They're trying to starve me out, I whispered. They want you to come back to Seattle and settle, Marcus said. They want you to formally surrender all future rights to the Apex Shield algorithm, sign an NDA, and accept joint liability for the damages. If you don't, they'll keep your credit nuked and your name tied up in litigation until you're 50. What happens if I fight it? I asked. What happens if we prove the email is a forgery? To do that, I'd need to hire a forensic digital investigator to subpoena Google's server logs and trace the IP address of where that email was actually sent from, Marcus said. It's highly doable. Jason is an idiot. He probably sent it from his own Wi-Fi. But forensic discovery costs money, Sarah. A lot of money. Upwards of 30 grand just for the initial retainers. I'm working pro bono right now because I hate Vanguard, but I can't front the forensic fees. I didn't have 30 grand. I had $11,000 and a car that, according to Carol's printout, was currently marked for repossession. If I don't fight it, I asked, then the default judgment stands. Marcus said gently, your wages will be garnished for the rest of your life. Your credit will remain in the gutter, and and your father walks away clean, letting you take the fall for his complicity. I closed my eyes. I pictured my dad standing in the driveway, holding the box of Jason's trophies, telling me he just wanted things to be easy. He didn't just want an easy life. He wanted it at my expense. He was willing to let me spend my life in a financial prison so he could keep his house. Don't talk to Vanguard, I said. Don't accept any settlements. Just stall them. Sarah, what are you going to do? Marcus asked. You can't run from a federal civil freeze. I'm not running, I said. I'll get the money for the forensic tech. Just give me a week. I hung up the phone. I sat in the car listening to the rain start to patter against the roof. I had spent 6 years building cybersecurity systems. I knew how to protect networks. I knew how to lock people out, but I also knew how to find the back doors people thought they had hidden. Jason had used my passwords to forge an email. He had used my digital footprint against me. I opened the glove compartment, pulled out my laptop, and traced the edges of the cold aluminum chassis. I didn't owe anyone a single thing, but my family owed me my life back, and I was going to collect. I didn't boot it up right away. I just sat there in the damp chill of the Honda, staring at the blank screen, listening to the rain drum against the roof. The car was marked for repossession. Carol at the property office had made that perfectly clear. If Equifax knew about the bridge loan Jason had taken out against my title, it meant the lender had already handed the paperwork over to the recovery agencies. Every automatic license plate reader on the West Coast was probably scanning for my tags right now. I couldn't stay in the car. I grabbed my laptop, my backpack, and the plastic bag holding my burner phone and the remaining cash. I locked the doors, pulled my hood up, and walked back to the Seaview Motel. The room smelled exactly the same bleach and stale regret. I deadbolted the door, sat cross-legged on the floral bedspread, and opened the laptop. I tethered it to the burner phone's cellular connection. It was slow, barely pulling 2 bars of 4G, but it was enough. I opened a secure, encrypted browser window and created a fresh Proton Mail account. I typed out a 2-line message to Marcus. It's Sarah. Send me the PDF of the email my dad submitted to the court, the one from April 10th. I hit send. Then, I waited. The silence in the room was heavy. I watched the digital clock on the bedside table flip from 3:14 to 3:15, then 3:16. I thought about my dad sitting in a deposition room, raising his right hand, swearing to tell the truth, and then sliding a piece of paper across a mahogany table to legally ruin his daughter's life. He hadn't just signed a loan document in a moment of weakness. He had sat down with Vanguard's corporate lawyers, looked them in the eye, and told a calculated, premeditated lie to protect his son. At 3:42, my inbox chimed. Marcus had sent a secure link. I clicked it and downloaded the file. It was a scanned black and white PDF labeled Times Exhibit 4A, Correspondence from S. Sterling. I opened it and zoomed in. It looked incredibly authentic. It was sent from my primary Gmail account. The subject line read, Times Contingency Plan, Apex. The body of the text was written in my exact cadence. Short, bulleted instructions, no emotional fluff. It explicitly authorized Jason to act as sole proxy for Apex Shield, to secure bridge financing to cover server costs, and to initiate acquisition talks if I was out of contact for more than 30 days. Jason had known me his whole life. He knew how I communicated. He even remembered to use the specific sign-off I always used for internal company memos. Track and verify. I felt a cold sweat prickle the back of my neck. If I were a judge looking at this, I would believe I wrote it. But Jason was a salesman, not a developer. He understood people, but he didn't understand systems. I looked closer at the top margin of the scanned printout. When you print an email directly from a web browser, the browser automatically generates a header and footer on the physical page. In the bottom left corner, in tiny, blurred 6-point font, was a URL string showing the exact web address of the page when the print command was executed. It wasn't a standard Gmail URL. It was a Google Takeout archive link. Jason hadn't logged into my live email account to send it. He had requested a full data archive of my account, downloaded it locally to his machine, and somehow injected a forged outgoing message into the offline archive before printing it out to show my dad. It was a crude offline forgery. That's why he only provided a physical printout to the court, claiming he had lost access to the live account after the server lockdown. If Vanguard's lawyers subpoenaed Google's actual server logs, they would see that message never passed through Google's outgoing servers on April 10th. But Marcus was right. Subpoenaing Google required a forensic expert, a court order, and $30,000 I didn't have. I needed to prove he forged it using something free, something accessible. I closed the PDF and leaned back against the headboard. How did he get into my account to request the takeout archive in the first place? I had 2-factor authentication turned on. Any login attempt from a new IP address would have pinged my physical phone. My phone had been with me in Nepal. It had died on day 3. I closed my eyes, walking through the digital architecture of my life. If my phone was dead, the only other trusted device that could receive a 2FA prompt was my old iPad, the one I left in the bedside drawer at my apartment in Seattle. Jason had gone to my apartment. He had taken my iPad. My eyes snapped open. The Apple ecosystem. Years ago, when I was fresh out of college and making my first real money at a junior dev job, I bought my parents new iPhones for Christmas. I set them up. I created their Apple IDs. And to make it easier to share the iCloud storage plan I was paying for, I put us all in an Apple family sharing group. I was the organizer. Jason had whined about wanting free storage a year later, so I added him too. I hadn't thought about that group in half a decade. I opened a new tab and navigated to iCloud.com. I typed in my Apple ID. The password was rejected. Jason had changed that too. But Apple's account recovery for the family organizer doesn't just rely on a phone number. It relies on the trusted devices of the family members. I clicked Times Forgot Password. A prompt appeared on the screen. To reset your password, approve the notification sent to one of your family sharing devices. I couldn't do that, but there was a small blue link at the bottom. Can't access your Apple devices? I clicked it. It asked me to verify the credit card on file for the iCloud subscription. It was an old American Express card I had memorized the numbers for years ago. I typed it in. It asked for the expiration date and CVV. I entered them. Identity verified. The screen flashed. Enter a new password. I typed in a complex alphanumeric string, hit enter, and watched the loading wheel spin. 3 seconds later, the iCloud dashboard populated on my screen. I was in. I didn't care about my own files. I clicked on the Times, Photos, Times icon. Because we were in a family sharing group, the default setting on older iOS versions was to automatically dump photos taken by any member into a shared family album unless they they manually opted out. My parents were in their 60s. They barely knew how to turn off the flashlight on their phones, let alone navigate iCloud privacy settings. The photo grid loaded, rendering thousands of thumbnails from the last 5 years. I grabbed the scroll bar and dragged it down to the timeline for April of last year. The screen populated with a cluster of images from my mother's phone, pictures of the garden, a blurry photo of the dog. I kept scrolling. April 14th, the day the earthquake hit. April 16th, a screenshot of a CNN news article about the death toll in Kathmandu, taken on my dad's phone. April 20th, 6 days after I disappeared. I clicked on a photo to enlarge it. It was taken inside Jason's apartment. I recognized the ugly leather sofa he refused to throw away. Spread out on his glass coffee table were a series of documents, a blank power of attorney form, a printed copy of my signature from an old birthday card, and my silver iPad glowing brightly in the center of the table. My dad had taken the photo. I knew it was his phone because his thumb was slightly visible in the bottom corner of the frame, a habit he could never break. I hit the right arrow key to move to the next photo. It was a close-up of a legal pad. The handwriting was unmistakable. It was my father's neat, blocky, architectural print. He had written out a draft of an email, the exact email that Vanguard was currently holding up as Exhibit 4A in federal court. At the bottom of the legal pad, in my dad's handwriting, was a note. Make sure you use the track and verify sign-off so it looks like her. My lungs seized. All the air left the room. He didn't just witness the lie, he authored it. He sat in his son's apartment, less than a week after the State Department told him his daughter was buried under a mountain, and he drafted the script to steal her company. I clicked to the next photo. May 2nd. It was a picture of my parents and Jason sitting at a table at El Gaucho, a high-end steakhouse in downtown Seattle. The table was covered in empty martini glasses and plates of half-eaten Wagyu. Jason was holding up a glass of champagne, grinning directly at the camera. My dad was sitting next to him, his arm draped over Jason's shoulder. They both looked flushed, relaxed, victorious. The metadata timestamp on the photo said it was taken at 8:45 p.m. On May 2nd at 8:45 p.m. Seattle time, I had been lying on a cot in a makeshift medical tent in the Himalayas, shivering uncontrollably from a fever, wondering if my family was crying for me. They were drinking champagne. They were celebrating the bridge loan clearing. I stared at the screen until my eyes burned. The hollow feeling in my chest was gone. The quiet, calculating calm I had felt driving down the coast evaporated. It was replaced by something entirely different. A hot, dense, suffocating rage that tasted like copper in the back of my throat. I right-clicked on the images and downloaded the original, uncompressed files to my hard drive. The metadata embedded in these photos, the GPS coordinates, the timestamps, the device serial numbers, was unalterable proof of collusion and perjury. I didn't need a $30,000 forensic expert to subpoena Google. I had my dad's own camera roll. I could send these to Marcus right now. He could take them to the judge on Monday morning. The civil freeze would be lifted. The perjury charges against my father would be reinstated. Vanguard would pivot their entire legal arsenal away from me and drop it squarely onto my parents and Jason. It would be a slaughter. I moved my cursor to the Proton Mail tab. I started a new message to Marcus. I attached the zip file of the photos. Before I could hit send, a sudden jarring sound cut through the silence of the room. It was a heavy mechanical clanking, followed by the deep grinding hum of a diesel engine right outside my window. I froze. I slowly lowered the laptop screen and crept toward the window. I peeled back the edge of the heavy floral blackout curtain just an inch and looked down into the parking lot. A flatbed tow truck was reversing into the spot directly in front of my room. Its yellow hazard lights flashed rhythmically, casting sickly yellow shadows against the wet brick of the motel. A man in a heavy rain slicker hopped out of the cab. He didn't look around. He didn't go to the front desk. He walked straight to the back of my Honda, knelt down in the puddles, and started feeding heavy steel chains through the rear axles. The bridge loan. They had found the car. Equifax had pinged the license plate scanner on a police cruiser or a toll booth somewhere on the 101, and the recovery order had been dispatched locally. I watched the man hook the chains to the winch. My heart hammered against my ribs. My first instinct was to run downstairs, to yell at him, to show him the cash in my room and try to buy him off, but my hand stopped on the deadbolt. If I went down there, he would ask for my ID. If he confirmed my identity, he was legally obligated to report the successful recovery to the lender. The lender would notify Equifax. And Vanguard's private investigators, who were undoubtedly monitoring my credit file by the hour, would have my exact physical location. They would know I was at the Seaview Motel in Eureka, California. They would send process servers. They would send lawyers. I took my hand off the lock. I had to let him take it. I stood completely still behind the curtain, barely breathing, watching the winch groan as it pulled the back end of the Honda off the asphalt. The front tires dragged against the pavement with a pathetic squeal. The man engaged the hydraulic lift, pulling the entire car onto the flatbed. He strapped the tires down, walked around the vehicle twice to check the tension, and then climbed back into the cab. He put the truck in gear, and with a hiss of air brakes, he pulled out of the parking lot and turned onto the main road, disappearing into the fog. The space where my car had been was just an empty, rectangular patch of dry asphalt, quickly filling with rain. I let the curtain fall back into place. I was officially stranded. I had no vehicle. I couldn't rent a car with a 412 credit score and a civil freeze. I couldn't buy a car without registering it in my name, which would trigger the same alerts. I was stuck in a rundown motel on the edge of the continent, with a backpack, $11,000 in cash, and a burner phone. I walked back to the bed and opened the laptop. The Proton Mail tab was still open. The zip file containing the photos of my dad's handwriting was attached, ready to go to Marcus. I stared at the send button. If I sent it now, Marcus would file it. Vanguard would destroy my family. It would be over. But as I looked at the attached file, the image of my father sitting at that steakhouse, drinking champagne on the exact night I was praying for rescue, burned in my mind. Just handing this over to a judge felt too clean. It felt like outsourcing the consequence. Vanguard's lawyers would bankrupt them. Sure, my dad might do a few months in a minimum security facility for perjury, but they would blame the system. They would blame the lawyers. They would find a way to make themselves the victims of corporate overreach. I didn't want them to be victims of Vanguard. I deleted the draft to Marcus. I closed Proton Mail. I opened a new incognito window and typed in the URL for the King County property tax portal. I pulled up the public records for my parents' house in Bellevue, the one my dad had just spent $50,000 remodeling, the one he was terrified of losing. I looked at the mortgage holder. It was a regional credit union. I didn't owe anyone a single thing, but I wasn't wasn't just going to clear my name anymore. I was going to tear the house down to the studs. I clicked the parcel number on the screen. The page loaded a grainy photo of the property from the county assessor's office, taken from the street. It was the same beige siding, the same overgrown rhododendrons by the mailbox, but below the photo, the public records told a very different story. I scrolled down to the permit history and recent recordings. Assessor records showed a flurry of activity starting in mid-May. Permits for plumbing, electrical, and structural modifications. A declared valuation increase of $65,000 for a kitchen and master bath remodel. Then I checked the recorded deeds and liens. There it was. A deed of trust recorded on May 15th, just 2 weeks after that steakhouse dinner. A $75,000 home equity line of credit through Pacific Northwest Credit Union. My dad had retired 2 years ago with a modest pension. My mom worked part-time at a garden center. They didn't have the income to qualify for a $75,000 HELOC on their own, not without a massive influx of verifiable cash or a guarantor with pristine credit. I opened a new tab and pulled up the standard lending requirements for Pacific Northwest Credit Union. They required 2 years of tax returns, proof of current income, and a debt-to-income ratio under 36%. My parents were drowning in credit card debt before I left for Nepal. I knew, because I used to pay their minimums every December as a Christmas gift. He lied on the application. He had to have. He either used Jason's fraudulent Vanguard payout as proof of future assets, or he forged my signature again to act as a guarantor using the power of attorney. If Vanguard knew about the HELOC, they would freeze it. But Vanguard's lawyers were focused on Jason's bank accounts and the corporate shell of Apex Shield. They were treating my parents as co-conspirators, but they hadn't started digging through municipal property records yet. Corporate litigators look at SEC filings and wire transfers first. They don't look at bathroom remodel permits in Bellevue. I opened my new Proton Mail account. I didn't write to Marcus. I drafted a new message, leaving the recipient blank for a moment. I needed to find the email address for Vanguard's lead litigator. That was easy enough. I went to the federal court docket website, pulled up the preliminary injunction filing Marcus had mentioned, and scrolled to the bottom. There it was. William R. Hastings, Senior Counsel, Vanguard Tech. I copied his email address and pasted it into the recipient line. I didn't write a greeting. I just typed 3 sentences. Check King County parcel hash for rate T1E10 to 0020. The Sterling estate secured a $75,000 HELOC on May 15th through Pacific Northwest Credit Union using fraudulently obtained assets as collateral. The funds are currently being dispersed to Cascade Builders for a private remodel. I attached the public permit PDF and the deed recording number. I didn't attach the metadata photos of my dad's perjury. Not yet. I wanted Vanguard to squeeze the house first. I wanted the credit union to panic. Banks have an acceleration clause in every mortgage contract. If they suspect fraud, or if the borrower is named in a federal civil suit that threatens the collateral, they don't wait for a verdict. They call the loan in immediately. I hit send. I closed the laptop and sat in the quiet of the motel room. My stomach let out a loud, hollow growl. I hadn't eaten since the diner that morning, and it was past 8 at night. I shoved the laptop under the mattress, grabbed one of the envelopes of cash, and took out a $50 bill. I walked out of the room, locking the deadbolt behind me, and headed down the exterior stairs toward the Denny's across the street. The rain had turned into a thick, misty drizzle. The neon sign of the transmission shop buzzed loudly, casting a red glare over the wet pavement. I walked into the diner. It was mostly empty. 2 truck drivers in a booth, a teenager wiping down the counter, and the smell of old grease and burnt coffee. I sat at the counter and ordered a patty melt and fries. I ate it mechanically, not really tasting it, just fueling my body. I watched the traffic roll past on the 101, logging trucks and old sedans. I was stranded. I needed a way to move that didn't involve my name, my credit, or my stolen car. When the teenager handed me my check, I put the 50 on the counter. "Keep the change," I said. He looked surprised. "Do you know anyone around here selling a car? Something cheap, cash. Doesn't need to be pretty, just needs to run." The kid pocketed the bill and looked around the empty diner. My uncle has an old Ford Ranger sitting behind his auto body shop down on 4th Street. It's got a cracked windshield and the heater is busted, but the engine is solid. He was gonna scrap it next week. How much would he want for it? "Probably $1,500, the kid said. "Maybe less if you have cash. Tell him I'll be there at 9 tomorrow morning with $1,200, I said. "And I don't want a bill of sale with my name on it. He can just sign the title over and leave the buyer line blank." The kid shrugged. "Sure, it's the blue shop next to the lumberyard. Ask for Dave." I walked back to the motel feeling a tiny fraction of control return to my hands. $1,200 for a truck left me with just under $10,000. Enough to live in this motel for 6 months if I ate cheap. Enough time to watch my parents' lives slowly dismantle. I slept heavily that night. No dreams, just a deep, exhausted blackout. I woke up at 7, showered in the lukewarm water, and checked my burner phone. There was a text message from an unknown number. It had come in at 4:15 a.m. "Sarah, it's Marcus. Call me the second you get this. From a secure line if you can. Do not ignore this." I sat on the edge of the bed, the damp towel wrapped around my shoulders. I dialed his direct line. He answered on the first ring. "You didn't sleep," I said. "Neither did Vanguard's legal team," Marcus shot back. His voice was tight, anxious. It wasn't his usual confident lawyer drawl. "Sarah, what did you do? I don't know what you're talking about." "Stop," he snapped. "At 11 o'clock last night, William Hastings filed an emergency ex parte motion to freeze a bank account belonging to your parents at Pacific Northwest Credit Union. They also filed a notice of lis pendens against their house in Bellevue, effectively blocking any further construction or sale. Hastings claimed an anonymous whistleblower provided proof of misappropriated funds." "Sounds like Vanguard is doing their job," I said flatly. "It sounds like you're playing with fire," Marcus said. "If they trace that tip back to you, they will use it to prove you are actively participating in the distribution of the estate's assets. They will drag you back into the criminal side of the fraud." "They can't trace it," I said. "It was an encrypted drop, and I'm not distributing anything. I'm pointing out public records." Marcus sighed, a heavy, static-filled sound over the cheap burner connection. "That's not why I'm calling, Sarah. The house freeze triggered a panic. Your parents' accounts are locked. The credit union froze their debit cards at midnight." "Good. No, not good," Marcus said. "Because at 6 this morning, my receptionist got to the office. Your mother was sitting on the steps outside our building." My hand tightened around the phone. "My mom? Why would she go to you?" "Because she doesn't know where you are, and she knows I'm your attorney," Marcus said. "She's sitting in my conference room right now, Sarah. She brought a suitcase. She says she has something to to give you, but she will only hand it over if I guarantee you'll call off Vanguard. I let out a short, bitter laugh. She wants to make a deal. With what? She has your iPad, Marcus said. The one you left in your apartment. She says there's a draft of the email on it, the one your dad submitted. She says she'll give it to me, so I can prove your dad forced Jason to write it, but only if you get Vanguard to unfreeze the Bellevue house. She was selling out my dad to save the house. Not to save me. To save her kitchen remodel. She didn't care who went to prison as long as she had granite countertops. Put her on speaker, I told Marcus. A rustle of fabric, the clank of a phone being set down on a hard surface. Then, my mother's voice, small and trembling. Sarah, sweetie, don't call me that. Sarah, please, she cried. And this time the tears sounded real. They locked us out of our checking account. Your father is having chest pains. We didn't know what Jason was going to do. We just signed the papers because he said it was the only way to pay for the private investigators to find you. There were no private investigators, Mom. And I know you knew. You co-signed unsecured loans in June. You signed a HELOC for a remodel using my stolen equity. Silence on the line. Just the ragged sound of her breathing. I have your iPad, she finally whispered, her voice hardening, dropping the helpless mother routine. Your father practiced the email. It's in the deleted notes. If you tell Vanguard to drop the lien on the house, Marcus can have it. He can clear your name. You can have your life back. I closed my eyes. It was so perfectly, horrifyingly transactional. They were bargaining with the knife they had used to stab me. I don't need the iPad, I said, my voice dropping to a low, calm register. I already have the photos from your iCloud, Mom. The ones Dad took of the legal pad on Jason's coffee table, the ones from the steakhouse on May 2nd when you were celebrating the loan clearing. A sharp intake of breath, the sound of a chair scraping loudly against the floor. I have the metadata, I continued. I have the GPS coordinates. I was going to send them to the judge on Monday to clear my name, but then I realized that wasn't fair to Vanguard. They deserve to know about the HELOC first. You, her voice broke. You tipped them off. Yes. You're destroying your own family, she screamed, the panic finally breaking through. We are going to lose everything. We'll be homeless. You were willing to let me be homeless. You were willing to let my wages be garnished forever, so you wouldn't have to downgrade to a condo. I stared at the peeling wallpaper of the Seaview Motel. You made your choice the day you decided $4 million was worth more than a funeral. Sarah, please, leave the iPad on Marcus's desk, I said, or throw it in the sound. I don't care. Tell Dad to hire a good defense attorney. He's going to need one when Vanguard subpoenas his Apple account. I didn't wait for her to answer. I hung up. I pulled the battery out of the burner phone, snapped the plastic casing in half, and tossed the pieces into the cheap plastic trash can by the desk. I was done. There were no more moves to make, no more emails to send. The avalanche had started, and I was finally out of its path. I grabbed my backpack, my laptop, and the envelopes of cash. I walked out of the room, leaving the key on the unmade bed, and didn't look back. The rain had finally stopped. The air smelled like ozone and pine needles. I walked the 4 blocks to the blue auto body shop next to the lumber yard. It was just past 9. The teenage kid from the diner was there, sweeping the garage floor. An older man in grease-stained overalls was drinking coffee by a hydraulic lift. Dave? I asked. He looked me up and down. You the one who wants the Ranger? I nodded. He pointed to the back of the lot. It was a faded, dented blue Ford with a crack running down the passenger side of the windshield. The tires looked decent. $1,200, I said, pulling the cash from my pocket. Dave took the money, counted it slowly, and pulled a folded pink title out of his shirt pocket. He signed his name at the top, left the buyer's line blank, and handed it to me along with a single brass key. She burns a little oil, he said. Keep an eye on the gauge. I will. Thanks. I threw my bag into the passenger seat and climbed in. The interior smelled like old tobacco and vinyl. I put the key in the ignition and turned it. The engine sputtered, coughed, and then roared to life with a steady, loud hum. I backed out of the gravel lot and pulled onto the 101, heading south. I didn't turn on the radio. I just listened to the sound of the tires on the wet pavement. I was driving a truck that didn't exist on paper, carrying cash that couldn't be traced, heading toward a state where nobody knew my face. My parents would lose the house. Jason would go to federal prison. Vanguard would spend the next 5 years clawing back every cent my family had stolen. They would fight each other in court, turning on each other to save themselves, trapped in a cage of their own greed. But I wasn't in the cage anymore. The sun finally broke through the fog as I crossed the county line, casting bright, blinding light across the Pacific Ocean. I rolled down the window. The cold, salt air hit my face, sharp and clean. I pressed my foot on the gas and kept driving.